All right. Well, we have an awesome lineup of speakers today. We're super excited to have not only two great representatives from the Canada Media Fund, but we also have Jen LaFace, who's on our board. She represents Only by Midnight and is also on the Digital Alberta board, like I mentioned. We also have Janine Steele, who is the director of IDM content for the Calgary Canada Media Fund, as well as Shelley Coltish, Deputy Director and Program Administration as well. We are super excited to see more and more representation of Alberta studios getting CMF funding. We're seeing a larger proportion of the money actually go to Alberta studios in the last couple of years. Janine was able to pull some stats, and actually in the last year, 6.5% of the allocated funding in that IDM stream went to Alberta studios, which was the highest that they'd seen since 2020. So it kind of ebbs and flows. And I think you see a lot of that natural ebbing and flowing. Maybe one year everybody's going for some of those larger pots of money, and then they don't need it the next year because some of those projects are ongoing. So definitely natural to see those ebbs and flows. But 2024 was a great year for Alberta. We've also seen some awesome other studios in the province get funding. We've seen this year Story City, Caldera, Crimson Herring, and Frozen Machine. So shout out to all of those studios, and we're excited, and hopefully this is another great year for Alberta studios. So with that, I will pass it over to Janine, and she has a great presentation to go through. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll do a question and answer period after Janine and Shelley's presentation, and then Jen will go, and we'll have another question and answer period after that as well.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. It's great to meet you all. Excited to be here. I'm also based in the West. I'm based out of Vancouver. And so as I've never hidden from my colleagues at the CMF, I'm very, very much in support of anything we can do to ensure that the regions around Canada, especially in the West, are getting their fair shake, their access to all of our national programs. So happy to be here, happy to answer any questions and hopefully demystify the process a little bit and how to access CMF funding. So I will jump right in. As Paisley mentioned, don't hesitate to drop any questions in the chat. And Shelley represents a really robust, wonderful team of resources that are the CMF program administration team, the analysts, the coordinators. We're all here to support you through the application process. We know it can be daunting. We know it's a lot of paperwork that we're asking for. It's not an easy lift. So they are an invaluable resource to you as you work through the system, work through the process. So, it doesn't stop today. We are here and available to continue to answer your questions after that. So I will make sure my slides are actually working. Here we go. So quickly, what we're going to go over today, I'll do a little bit for those of you who are not familiar with the Canada Media Fund. I'll just do a quick sort of who we are, what we do, how we work. We'll get into a bit of detail about what programs we offer in the interactive and digital media space. And then we'll have a bit of a deep dive on how to apply and some tips to help maximize your application potential. And then lastly, of course, last but not least, Jen will take over and talk a little bit about her experience in accessing our funds. So without further ado, who we are. So the Canada Media Fund, we are Canada's largest financier of screen-based cultural media and media content in the entertainment sectors. Really, our vision and mandate is to guide Canadian content towards a competitive global space. And that's global, including Canada. It's really important for us and our stakeholders to make sure that what we're creating, what we're helping to support create, reaches Canadian audiences. And as we know in the IDM space, that is a global market. We're not sort of limited by country borders. So it's very much a global space that we're looking to work in. So we work on sort of a three-pronged process. We help to finance, that's our primary business, but we also help to foster and develop industry and sector development. And we work to promote Canadian audiences, Canadian voices to Canadian audiences to the world. As much as we can around the world. So really, we're looking to contribute to a vibrant, sustainable, thriving ecosystem of Canadian creators that really sort of transcend platforms, transcend borders, and really to spark conversation and entertainment. So we do that. We're a nonprofit society, a little bit different from some of maybe the other national organizations. So we're arm's length from government. We are, a national body, but we have an independent board of directors, and we receive our funding in sort of two ways. A bulk of our money does come through Canadian Heritage, just like to Telefilm Canada or the National Film Board of Canada, Canada Council. But we also receive about half of our money comes from Canada's sort of cable, satellite, and sort of platform distributors. So that's actually through the regulatory process. So the Canadian Broadcasting Act, in order for all of those cable providers to operate in Canada, that part of their commitment and their obligations in order to operate in the country is to put money aside to support independent Canadian content. So a portion of their revenues every year, profits every year, go into a pot for independent Canadian content. And a large portion of that comes to the Canada Media Fund. So sort of what we do and how we do it, we have a large budget, an annual budget of just about $360 million per year. That goes up and down year to year, both, as I say, depends on the revenues that are coming in from our what we call our PDUs, so those cable providers, and what's available through Canadian Heritage. So, and as if you might have seen yesterday, there was the annual government budget. So there is, they reaffirmed our annual budget of that's towards this 360 million. And occasionally we'll see sort of pockets of money as well that are sort of one-time commitments to support different mandates and initiatives that Canadian Heritage has. So we've come off of 60 million. We just sunsetted a 60 million over 3-year commitment that was focused in the EDI space, for example. We're looking at how we can continue to support in that space, and a lot of the work that we've done to help sector development and DEIA initiatives, as that money is that's not part of our sort of core budget. So how our money is kind of broken out, we break it out into what we call linear, which is primarily film and television, and then interactive and digital media, which includes our immersive and digital media content. So that's really what we're here to talk about today. I would say that the lion's share of our money does go to television. About 85 to 90% of our funding does go into the television broadcast space, and leaves a portion for IDM. So we can fund projects in our primary sort of languages, so English and French, but also Indigenous languages, especially in the broadcast side. We're seeing a lot of industry work on supporting the growth and sustainability and revitalization of Indigenous languages in the broadcast and entertainment spaces. So just a quick overview of, as I say, how that money is broken out. So about $45 million a year is available for our IDM programs, and then the remainder, as I say, is going to a lot of our film and television programs. This is available on our website. I won't go through, program by program what the budgets are, but you can see a copy of this on our website as well. So how do we kind of spend that money? So just again, quick overview, linear programs, the budget this year will be just over $300 million. Since the inception of the CMF in 2010, we've funded nearly $4 billion of funding on the linear side and nearly 7,000 projects. And in the IDM space, as I say, our budget is just under $45 million for this year. And that's pretty consistent. It's been pretty consistent over the last several years. It's since 2010, we've funded over $500 million in production and nearly 700 projects, including many that are on in Alberta, as Paisley mentioned earlier. So what do our programs in the IDM space look like? So really our goal in IDM is to encourage bleeding edge, innovative, commercially accessible potential projects that are interactive digital media content and software applications. So really we're trying to develop projects that can reach wide audience potential within the Canadian international marketplace, and really trying to support innovation and bleeding edge work that Canadian content creators are taking on. And that innovation can come through in content, in technology, in how we're approaching our business, how we're approaching our audiences. So we do that. Who do we fund? Who's eligible to come through? So companies, eligible companies. That's how we support funding. So it needs to be a for-profit Canadian owned and controlled production company. As well, on the broadcast side, Canadian broadcasters are also an eligible applicant to the CMF, but I won't get into the detail of that. So for this purposes of today, it's really about companies and projects. We are primarily a project-based financier. So you are applying to us with an individual project to individual programs. So our projects in the IDM space, one of the key critical components is that they must be significantly interactive or highly immersive and connected to the cultural sector. And I'll get into a little bit more detail, like what we mean by that. So what are we funding? We're funding games, and that could be console games, mobile games, as games on different platforms, different handhelds, and web-based games. We are also funding content in the XR space, so virtual reality, augmented reality experiences, immersive experiences, location-based physical exhibitions and installations. We'll see, we've really run the gamut of what we find. And this is a space, obviously, that form and format is constantly evolving. And so we try not to be too prescriptive in what those forms are. This is what we commonly see coming through, but we also recognize that it's constantly evolving. So as project ideas come up, and new forms of sort of at the intersection of content and story and technology come to the fore, we want to be open and available to that and encourage that experimentation at these intersections. So in terms of, as I say, eligibility, that's, that highly interactive piece is really a critical component to our IDM programs. So we have a list of ineligible projects, and this is not an exhaustive list, but just to give you a sense of what we do fund and what we don't fund. So this is not an initiative that supports sort of corporate or promotional content. This is not about, companion websites to existing, existing film and television projects, for example, or for sort of internal projects that are not really like if you're building the next Slack, right? That's not really intended to be used outside of your organization. That's not what this program's for. We're also not in the e-learning space. So curriculum-based or e-learning projects is not a focus for the CMF. I know what some other agencies across the country, can and have supported that type of content, but we don't. Anything that's more in the sort of pure research and development space, things that would be eligible for, things like SR&ED at the federal level or IRAP. These are not the types of things we're looking at. We're looking at content by and for Canadians and international audiences that are connected to the cultural sector in the entertainment space. We also don't get involved in sort of gamification of non-cultural content. So this might be like e-health apps, wellness apps, anything in the gambling, like gambling with real money, like gambling content. We're not building and supporting that type of work through this program. And also digital marketplaces. So, if you're building, NFT stores or social media platforms or, pay systems, that's not really our focus. Again, it has to come back to that cultural and entertainment piece. So a quick overview of what programs we do offer. We have 4 main programs sort of under our IDM stream. They really run the gamut of they would try to reflect the phases of work that we know you have to go through on your end of things. So we support the ideation phase through what's called the conceptualization program. And this is really, I like to describe it, and Shelley, I'm sure, has lots of other words too, but I like to describe it as, taking that idea out of your head and putting it on paper. So that first sort of pitch document, as you start to really crystallize, what is my idea? What is my concept? This is a way to help you get that idea on paper and start talking to your potential investors and partners. So up to $15,000 is available through that program. This is a first come, first serve program. Shelley will talk a little bit about how our programs run a little bit later, but what that means is you can apply at any time, and as long as money is available and the project and the program, project and the company is eligible, then the money can be committed to you. So this is not a competitive or selective process. So it's a really great way to begin to build your relationship with the CMF. Next, we also have prototyping programs, so still in these earlier stages, these ideation or concepting stages. This is really about building and supporting and recognizing we need that vertical slice. So if you need to test functionality, you've got a great idea on paper, maybe you've done some UX and UI, you've done your paper prototyping, but you really need to build something playable to bring to investors, to bring back to the CMF to help support, future rounds of funding. This is the program for you. You can request up to $250,000 through this program. This is a selective program. It is highly competitive. We get the vast majority of folks that apply to us, unfortunately, we can't support simply because the money's not there. So it's good to sort of think about where your project's at and what the right program phase is for you. So again, this is about building that vertical slice. And then lastly, we have production and marketing phase support. And so this is really about getting you from that strong idea, that strong demo, through to the final release version of your project. And we have done that through two different programs that have slightly different aims and goals. Up to $1.5 million is available in this program. And these are both also selective programs. So you are applying at a certain date and then being reviewed against an evaluation criteria. And that's a juried process. Again, Shelley will talk. Sorry, I'm jumping into Shelley's slides. Shelley will talk a bit more about that later. So these programs, again, slightly different focus, innovation. Hello. I'm sorry. I hear oh, that's quite all right. I love puppies. So yes, so the innovation and experimentation program. So the focus of this is really on innovation in all of its forms. So really about projects that are pushing the boundaries of what we want to do at that intersection of culture and content, technology, and story. And so it's really about, how are you addressing needs or gaps or opportunities within your audience and marketplace in really innovative and fun and experimental ways. Commercial projects program is really about that wide audience reach and potential. And so the focus within the commercial projects program is about, what is your business model? How are you going to market? Who is your audience? How are you planning to reach them and maximize your opportunities in doing that? So they sort of complement each other and look at sort of the different ways in which we're trying to reach audiences and support content in Canada. So I'll also mention those are our primary programs, our 4 core programs, but we also support co-productions at the CMF. And so both majority and minority co-productions are eligible to apply to all of our programs on a case-by-case basis. Generally speaking, it's going to vary. This comes out of a linear television model and film and television model, right? There's international treaties that really that Canada signs with other countries that really sets the stage for how this works in the film and television space. Very, very specific guidelines depending which country you are partnering with. But in the IDM space, we don't have that treaty process. So what we've done instead is we've developed a looser but supportive framework for international co-production. And that's just really getting at what's the minimum sort of co-production relationship that we want to see in order to access funding to the CMF. So we encourage folks to read through that. Generally speaking, that's looking, Shelley, correct me if I'm wrong, 20%, 30%? 20%. 20% of the IP is still retained by the Canadian co-producer. And the thing to keep in mind here is if you are applying with an international co-production to any of our programs, the funding that you can request from the CMF will be based on the Canadian portion of that budget. So when you look at that financial and creative control, you might only have, if you only have 20% of the budget and 20% of the control, that's how much you're going to be able to ask from us. As well, we do provide a service. It's not perfect, but there is a co-producer directory on our website. You can both add yourself as a potential Canadian co-producer or search for international partners. This is not a vetted database. People can add themselves as they see fit. So, it's enter sort of at your own discretion and caution, but it is an opportunity to both put your name out there and potentially find co-production partners. So we support that through all of our programs, the IDM, within the IDM space. We also do support a small number of international incentives and national domestic partnerships, which I'll talk about together. So our international incentives, this is really about encouraging that international collaboration. These are all ad hoc sort of annual renewal programs. Right now, we just announced this week the renewal of our Berlin, Germany incentive. So the Median Board Berlin Brandenburg is our partner in Berlin, Germany. That just got announced, the guidelines just got reposted this week, and the deadline will be coming up in June for that. So you've got a couple months to find a potential partner and see if that's a program that's a good fit. We also have ongoing partnerships with Northern Ireland Screen. So if you're looking at co-producing within Northern Ireland, that's a great opportunity, as well as the Film Fund Luxembourg. So the only one that's currently open is Germany. Northern Ireland and Luxembourg should be, we're in discussions with those partners about renewing those programs for this year. So keep an eye on our website. The nice thing about these programs is that it's, they're generally speaking, that heavy lift at the beginning to find the right co-production partner is obviously a challenge, but they are not as heavily oversubscribed perhaps as some of our main programs. So it's a great opportunity if you're already working in that international space or looking for co-production partners in these regions. It's a great opportunity to access a bit of different pots of money at the CMF. So this is outside of those main programs. And I just wanted to flag that we do also do some national and domestic partnerships. So both the Shaw Rocket Fund and the IPF, they're in the digital media space. They are focused on short form digital series or web series. So if that's a complement to the work that you already do, those are great programs to keep an eye out for. Those are national programs, so they're open to folks across the country. We generally do those on an annual basis. And again, we look at focusing on particular spaces that we want to fill gaps or needs or challenges nationally. I mentioned Ontario Creates here because we do a host of domestic partnerships. Some of them are with national partners like the IPF. Some of them are with regional partners, and so they are focused in that region. So Ontario Creates is an example of that, where we have a digital media development program with Ontario Creates that's focused on Ontario companies. And I mentioned that just here, if you want to lean on Digital Alberta as your advocacy voice, if there were opportunities within Alberta where the Alberta government was putting funds towards IDM content creation, and that could then potentially be leveraged through partnerships with folks like the CMF. So that might be an area of advocacy that Alberta wants to focus on, put some pressure on the provincial governments, put some money on the table. All right, so I'm going to stop there. I feel like I've been talking a lot, but we're going to pass on to Shelley, who's going to talk a little bit more in detail about the application process and how to best approach that. Shelley?
Great, thank you. Hi, I'm Shelley Coltish. I'm a Deputy Director at Telefilm, but we focus on administering the CMF programs in my department. So how to apply, which is mostly the questions that we get, other than is my project eligible. Let's take you through that process. So next slide. Oopsies, okay. So steps to applying. So we have an application portal, which is called Dialogue. Now, the confusing part about it that you should know is that there is Canada Media Fund, which is its own company, and then there is Telefilm, which is a Crown Corporation of the government. You have to apply to the Dialogue, get your Dialogue account through the Telefilm website because, well, CMF is its own company. They create all the programs, they liaise with the government, they do all the marketing and promotion, they do all kinds of data and research and statistics and all kinds of things. Telefilm actually administers the programs and you apply through Dialogue at Telefilm. So that can be confusing for people to understand, but there are links on the CMF website to get back to the Telefilm website to apply for your Dialogue account. But if you want to make it easy, just go to telefilm.ca and you create your Dialogue account there if you don't already have one. So when you do that, so you apply for a new account, there's a few validation steps that you'll have to go through with enrollment to get your account completely up and running. Don't do your account on the day of the application. That's one thing that's going to be coming up in my tips, because it usually takes a couple days at least to get it up and running. So it would be very stressful to try and get it all done on the day of the deadline. So I would advise don't do that. So you complete your Dialogue account. Then we have a new system called Persona ID. So all of your key personnel need to sign up for a Persona ID. So again, not a thing to do on the day of the deadline, because as a producer, if you're the producer with your applicant company applying, you're going to need to get all of your key personnel to give you their Persona ID. They have to sign up on their own because it's private. The producer actually can't know what they said in their Persona ID. They can have a discussion with them and say, like, I'd like to use you for certain specific points in the point structure. But if that person wants to sign up for Persona ID and mark, I choose not to answer for every question, instead of declaring whether they are diverse or a woman or whatever the points happen to be geared towards, that's their prerogative. You know, so it's voluntary. They like, getting a Persona ID is not voluntary for key personnel, but actually answering the questions is voluntary. And then they have to give their number to the producer, who will then enter it in their key personnel structure when they make their application. So that's an important thing to get your key personnel to do. And the key personnel is listed, by the way, in the guidelines, so you know exactly what we consider to be key personnel. But I'll get into that a little more later. But yeah, definitely get your dialogue account created and get your key personnel to make their Persona IDs well in advance of the deadline, because you otherwise, I don't know whether you would have time to do it and or will be extremely stressed out on that deadline day. The next thing you should always do is, I know some of them are boring, but read the full guidelines because you need to understand, you know, what is an eligible applicant? What is an eligible project? What are a list of ineligible projects? Because Janine did give you some, but there's a more exhaustive list in the guidelines. Also on the website, and this is on CMF's website, not Telefilm's, go to the program that you want to apply to and make sure you download all of the application resources, which includes budget templates, required document checklists, various other forms that you need, a director shareholder form to tell us, you know, who's in control of the company. One thing to keep in mind too is, with selective funds, you don't need to incorporate to apply, but you will need to incorporate if you get selected. But you should still, if you're not incorporated, fill out that director shareholder form, because we need to know who will be the shareholders and who will be in control of the company. There is also an application guide. There's a tab in two places. Under application resources, there are the applicant documents that you'll need in the checklist. There's also a little tab called Need Help. And under Need Help, you'll have the application, like, how-to guide. So if you get stuck while you're creating your application in Dialogue, you can refer to this guide and see what the steps are, and it will tell you what to do. The other place you can find that is if you're actually in Dialogue creating your application, there's a link somewhere near the top saying, do you need help? Link to the application guide. So you can find it in two places. So if you're getting stuck and you're like, what do I put in this section? Refer to that guide. It will generally tell you. If it doesn't, you can contact us, and contact information is coming at the end of this presentation. I would give yourself more than, you know, a short, like a week or a few days to actually make your application, because you need to go through that document checklist and gather the materials that you need to make the application. It usually takes a few months for people to make an application. And I do get phone calls occasionally saying, oh, I just found out about this yesterday and the deadline's tomorrow. You know, should I put an application in? And my answer is always, listen, if you've already made an application for another funding agency, like maybe you've already applied to DigiB or Creative BC for something, or Ontario Creates. If you already have everything kind of all sort of done, you could possibly whip it together and tweak it for us. But if you have nothing, really don't do that, because it's a very competitive process and you're only allowed 2 times per round. So 2 times for prototyping, 2 times for innovation, and 2 times for commercial. So if you waste one of your turns because you weren't ready, that's not great. You would really want to apply when you're ready. So you need to spend some time gathering the materials that you need to fill all the things on the required documents checklist. And keep in mind that there have been producers who have been working on this for months, and their application is going to be more complete and thorough than yours. So it's not a good idea to whip together an application at the last second. And then finally, after you've filled in all the fields in Dialogue and you've uploaded all the required documents from the checklist, you submit online. So let's go to the next one. Okay, so I'll just finish my thought. I didn't know if it was on this slide or not. But once you submit online, just how you know how the process works. So for prototyping and innovation and commercial, it's a selective process. So the next thing that will happen, somebody will vet it for eligibility internally, and then it will go to the person that is scoring it. In the case of prototyping, that's our internal specialists. And in the case of innovation and commercial, that's the jury. Oh, sorry, I've got ahead of myself. So it takes about 6 to 8 weeks to get a decision. So, you know, once you submit, it kind of goes into a vacuum and you can't even access your own application. So you'll, you know, be waiting for several weeks, and then finally you'll get an email from Dialogue that is sort of cryptic. It's just you get this email that says a decision has been made, and then click on this link to see your decision, and then that takes you to your Dialogue account, and then there is a decision letter associated with your file. So that's where you open it and you can see whether it's positive or negative. The negative letters will either say you were ineligible or it will say you didn't rank. The positive letters will tell you how much money you got and what's the next steps. And you can also, even if your file was whether positive or negative, you can immediately go to the analysis tab and access all your notes and scores and see. And you can follow up with us if it's negative to see what could you do to improve for next time. So let's go back to the other one that I skipped. Sorry about that. So guidelines. So the guidelines have been sort of reorged from how they used to be. So for those of you who are used to basically all of the guidelines having all the information in them, and you know, so you have several 30-page guidelines, it's now been shifted. So we have the IDM core guidelines. These are all the main rules. So these are eligible applicant, eligible projects, Canadian control, various factors that you need to have, various other sort of miscellaneous requirements like, you know, it can't be finished already, or you can't violate like certain CRTC policies and various things like that. And it has like basically the core of the guidelines, all the main rules. And then you have specific program guidelines for conceptualization, prototyping, innovation, commercial, which are now much shorter. And they will probably say in them, and Janine, correct me if I'm wrong, but refer to the IDM core guidelines for the main rules, but here's the rules for this specific program. And then it will give the specific rules plus the scoring grid, which is very important to look at, because in the scoring grids, there's little bullet points under each section that we score. And we look at every single one of those little bullet points. So I always recommend people almost use those as headers and speak to each one of them. And it's also important when you're deciding in production and marketing, am I applying for commercial or innovation? I would almost put both, unless you know for sure, but I'd almost put both if you're not sure on screen together and kind of look like which one do I think I will do better in. So it's very important to look at those scoring grids and kind of decide which program is most appropriate for your program or your project. Appendix A, it's an appendix to the guidelines, which lists all the definitions. So if you're, for example, wondering what's a diverse producer, it will tell you. So you'll note in Appendix A, the first probably, I don't know how many pages, but the first bulk of pages is about television genres for our linear programs. So you can skip past that, just get to the definitions, which is at the end. So if you want to know what's various terminology that we say in the guidelines mean, it's all in there. And then Appendix B, well, the bulk of it, again, is linear. It's important to look at it because you need to read the insurance policy, because in both prototyping and innovation and commercial, you need to budget for insurance. So well, in your budget, you have, you know, all your labor costs and producer fees and post or equipment and materials and whatnot, and marketing in the production funds. There's a whole section at the end about legal fees and, you know, accounting fees and insurance fees, and you need to look and see what kinds of insurances we need, because they can be quite expensive, and you want to make sure you budget for the right things so that you don't get caught, if you get selected, not having budgeted enough money for these things. So it's very important to look at the insurance policy in Appendix B. So that is that for that slide, I think. So I did that already. Okay. So tips to maximize success. So again, I've already said this, make sure you sign up well in advance. If you have a question, not like how do I sign up for Dialogue or how do I fill out the budget, that you can send to our coordination department and they can help you or give you to an analyst. But pre-application consultation is more, I have an idea and I don't know if it's eligible and I'd like to describe it to you and have an analyst contact me with an opinion, essentially. So you can either do that directly or you can sign up for a pre-application consultation, which essentially is a service through Dialogue where you basically upload whatever you want looked at and you put a description of your project and then you put a question. What is your question? You know, is it eligibility? Is it something else? Is it, you know, it doesn't have to be just about eligibility. It could be about, you know, have I done my budget properly or something like that. But essentially it's a 90% of the time used for eligibility questions. If you already have contact with an analyst and you just want to talk to them about it on the phone because you had a previous project with them, that's still fine. But this is an easy way to sign up for pre-app if you're new to get our opinion on something. But again, it shouldn't be used for like clerical matters or administrative matters, mostly project related stuff. One thing I would mention that we cannot do is you can't upload your entire application and ask us to pre-review it. We just don't have time for that. So we don't pre-review an application and say, you're going to do well, because we don't know, because we don't know what projects we're going to get in that round, because technically you are compared to everything else that comes in that round. So you know, it's impossible for us to give you a pre-opinion. So this is just for more specific questions. And then as far as application success, as Janine mentioned, it's quite competitive. We generally have enough money to fund around 20 to 25% of what comes in. You always have a second chance. So if you don't get it the first time, you can consult with an analyst. You could read all the notes from the jury and the analyst to see if there's any places you could improve. But like I said, don't try to whip an application together at the last second. Really take the time to ensure that you're truly ready to apply. Yeah, also, as you write your materials and you finish them and you know you look over them yourself, you might be too close to this situation, so you might want to get a feedback from a colleague or a friend who doesn't know much about the project, because there have been times where we read something and then we read it again and we read it again and we read it again and we're like, what is this? Like, we just don't understand what this idea is. So it might be that you're way too close to the material and you need somebody to read it and give you advice. I mean, that doesn't happen a lot, but it can happen. And so it's always good to get a third party opinion. So, and then of course, every point counts. So, you know, it's so competitive that sometimes people don't get the funding by like 0.5. And I'm not even kidding about that. It can happen. And so you want to make sure that you don't, you basically, all those little bullet points I said in the evaluation criteria and the grid, you want to speak to all of those. You want to make sure you address everything. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to call us, because the answer to that question might be the difference between whether you provide the right information or not. So, you know, be sure to read the guidelines and the evaluation criteria careful and address it all, because every point counts. So next slide. Then also, yes, the application support document. So I did mention before, when you go to each program, the first section is fuchsia or bright pink, and it's the guidelines and the appendixes. And then the second section in blue is application resources. You want to download all of those documents because it includes the document checklist, templates, guides, budget that is templates, budget templates, but there are templates for other things. Like we have criteria for narrative positioning statement and community engagement and environmental sustainability. You want to make sure you fill all of those out because they're worth points. So the narrative positioning statement, there and community engagement, I believe there are criteria on there that apply to everybody, linear and experimental, but then there's a section explaining experimental I have to start calling it IDM. I'm sorry about that. There's a section saying, like, if you don't have XYZ to explain, like let's say in the narrative positioning statement, it talks about how you will what your relationship will be like and how you will deal with things in regards to sovereign and equity seeking communities. But if you're doing a video game that has nothing to do with that and is I would say generic, but let's say generic. You might think this statement doesn't apply to me, but it does. And there are instructions on the form to how to fill it out when you're in that kind of a situation. Stay within the page limits. That's really because we want to be able to turn this over for you to get you decisions in a timely time frame. And you know, so the evaluators are instructed, don't read past the page limits. In the first year in 2010, we got 300-page applications, and if you want a decision within a 8-week period, there's no way the jurors could read all of that. So we put in the second year of this fund, we put page limits in and instructed the jurors and the analysts, don't read past the page limit, and they actually will write, I didn't read past page 15, so that you know. The other thing you shouldn't do is for support material, don't write Appendix A to my innovation document, 30 more pages. Don't do that. The only kind of text-based material you should use for support material is if you get letters of interest from people or that want to use your product, perhaps. But generally, support material should be visual, artwork, demos, videos, etc. And then again, as I've said, if not successful, review the feedback that's provided. You can access it immediately once you get your decision letter. So you can go through everything that was said. You can see your scores. And then if you need more information, you can follow up with us for a phone call to go through where could you improve. And that's that for this, I think.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I have it. Oh, I've seen a few questions in the chat. So it says, is the limit of 2 applications per project or per organization?
Project.
Per project. Oh, awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, it can't be per organization because we have several very big studios that submit many things throughout the year. So it is per project and per stream. Yes, Mark, per stream also. So if you submitted the same project twice to prototyping, you're locked out of prototyping for that project. But let's say you decide to finish the prototype on your own, you could then apply for innovation or commercial. And if for some reason, let's say you didn't get it twice in innovation, you could pivot it and try to apply for commercial twice. Hopefully you won't need to apply 6 times to get the funding, but that's the rule in general.
Great. Those are the only questions I saw in the chat. Does anyone else have a question? Oh, got a few more right as I said that. For the insurance and the IDM production stream, do you need to keep insurance active for the full 7 years of repayment or only for the time of development?
I don't think it's for the full 7 years. I haven't committed the insurance policy to memory. I think you only need to have it for a certain amount of years before the statute of limitations to whatever, like at least in errors and omissions. I think after it's been posted for, or sorry, if the project is launched for a certain amount, like maybe 1 or 2 years, at a certain point, people cannot sue you for whatever anymore. I'm not a lawyer though, so like check with your insurance broker and check with your lawyer because I'm not an expert on it. And it's a little bit dense to read. It doesn't list the years, but if you need specific information about how many years it needs to be in place, just call us and I'll check with the people that know.
Yeah.
I also noticed a question about can you skip a step and apply directly for prototyping? Yes, you can skip any step. So you don't need to come in for conceptualization, then prototyping, then innovation or commercial. In fact, if you're finished your prototype and you come to prototyping, we will reject you. Similarly, if you're well past conceptualization and you come to conceptualization, we will reject you. So come for the stage that you need to apply for. Sorry, Janine, I'm not giving you a chance to answer.
No. This is really your area of expertise.
Yeah.
I'm happy to
So
have you grab
also,
these. You let me know if you need me to.
Sure. I'll pitch it to you if I need to. How do we approach the budget for conceptualization? How is it evaluated? So as Janine pointed out, conceptualization is not scored. So your project just needs to be eligible, and as an applicant, you just need to be eligible. And if there is money in the fund, you'll get the money. As far as your budget, though, it will get evaluated by an analyst, and they will tell you if you've put anything in the budget that they think is like, inflated, or ineligible, they'll let you know and they'll give you a chance to fix it. So you won't get booted out if you do. Like, you should basically just budget fair market value for the costs that you need to make whatever you want to make for conceptualization. And if we think that it's if the costs are overblown, or we think this cost is ineligible, we'll just tell you and we'll ask you to redo it before we go to contract. So don't worry about doing anything wrong necessarily for conceptualization, because we will let you have a chance to correct it. It's a little bit more important in prototyping and production and marketing, though, to get it right, because you get scored on your budget. So you get scored on financial viability. There's a variety of things you get scored on, but a few points at least goes towards the budget. So if you've done a budget that's either so bare bones that we don't even think you can do it, or it's so overblown that we think you're over budgeting for everything, you could lose points for that. And that's important on the scoring grid, because, you know, like I said, it's very important to get the best points you can. So, like, really try and think about what is the scope of your project, who do you need to do it, how many weeks, and what, you know, what's fair market value costs. I mean, you can pay people with experience more than, you know, the bare minimum if their CV supports it, and they should get paid a little more than the average person. That's fine, but we want to, you know, we want to make sure it's reasonable. How important are financial records? New studios won't. Yeah, so that's true. New studios won't be able to submit 3 years worth of financial statements, and that's okay. But just be aware, as a new studio, you know, we're scoring your team. We do score the studio. The bulk of the points go towards the team, though. I think 7 of 13 points goes towards us reading the CVs and experience of all of your key personnel. But you will, you know, as a new studio, you're automatically perhaps going to lose some points off the top that you can't do anything about the studio's history. But, you know, that's just a portion of the points. The bulk of it goes towards the actual key personnel and what you've designated as their duty and what their experience is on their CV. Can you apply for a stage if you were already in progress on it? Oh, I think I answered this already. Yeah. So, if you're already in progress, though, so we're not a completion fund. So if you're almost done a prototype, you can apply to have your costs covered retroactively. But if you've started and you still have a bulk of the work to do, we do allow in prototyping for 3 months before application date to be included in the budget. And in production, we allow for 6 months prior to application date to be included in the budget. But what we do tell people is, even though you can budget for some costs that have already been spent, that's first of all at your own risk, because you might not get the funding. But if you do, we want to make sure that we're funding the bulk of this project. We're not, like, the bulk of the costs going forward is for the bulk of the project. We're not funding things that are almost finished. That would be ineligible. And if you're not sure whether you qualify, call us and we'll ask you questions and let you know. Are there any guidelines around the content in a game, specifically around violence or more mature themes? So yes, they're in the miscellaneous requirements in the IDM core guidelines. It talks about some sort of code of ethics that I can't remember. Janine, do you remember? Like the code of, like, there can't be sexual violence.
It's really about excessive sexual or criminal violence. It's you know it's not for all audiences. It doesn't have to be for all audiences or general audiences, but there needs to be sort of, if it's very mature adult content that would not be that would sort of go against sort of our moral and ethical codes.
That being said, we fund horror games. So we funded Dead by Daylight. We funded, what is it, Outlast or something? I can't remember. But we funded some games where it was literally you're running from a serial killer, or you're trying to kill the serial killer, like, or you're like shooting at people, you know. So we've certainly funded mature audience games. It's just there is a line that can't be crossed, and I think it's is it the CAB or the CRTC Code of Ethics? So
I think, I don't remember. I don't think we, did we mention CAB? Because it's
I don't think we do, because it's not
a lot.
applicable to us,
a lot of it's not really applicable to us. So we don't really talk about. We just talk about sort of like general, industry standards of ethics and morality.
Yeah.
So it's, but that line, as to Shelley's point, like that doesn't mean mature content totally welcome, but when it's crossing crossing a line,
Yeah.
and
So for
that will just be
example,
determined on a case by case basis.
yeah, exactly. And so, for example, though, I would say, having been a player myself, if this were a Canadian game, we would have funded Grand Theft Auto 5, and that's got a lot of sexual and mature and shooting and murders and, like, but it's not crossing that line into whatever is this rule that we have. But if you have questions and you want to know, just call us again and we'll take a look at what your project is and we'll let you know. If you're unsure of where you are between prototyping and production, is that something where you could ask? Yes, absolutely. You could send in a pre-app or you can call our coordination department and they'll refer you to an analyst. Because yeah, that sometimes you don't sometimes you're not sure, are you ready yet for production, or are you too far along for prototyping, or that's something we have to look at on a case-by-case basis. Are often videos used in supporting materials for prototyping, just trying to get it. So videos, so I'll start with production and marketing. So videos in production and marketing would usually be a video walkthrough of your prototype, because we can't really take executable files because we don't have necessarily the ability to open them. But for prototyping, videos that I see are usually, let's say in conceptualization, you made a little demo. It's not much, but you made a little demo. That would be fine. Sometimes people also take the opportunity to do a video pitch. Not everybody, like that's the minority of clients, but some people want to get on camera and pitch at us. And so as long as it's not like more than, like it shouldn't be long. Like we don't want to see 20, 30-minute videos. We're talking like 10 minutes or less, and really 5 minutes or less is preferable because we have to like get these decisions out in a good amount of time. But yeah, you could do a little video pitch. You could show us a demo you made in conceptualization. Those are all fine. Is there any benefit to games showcasing a Canadian setting? No. In the TV fund, we have certain rules around that, and they've even loosened up during the years. I mean, I've been here for 22 years, and I remember a time where we used to joke that you have to put Mounties and hockey sticks in your show to get in. But in the experimental fund, we've never had that. There has to be Canadian control, and it has to have significantly and meaningfully be developed by Canadians. And Canadians need to control the rights to distribute and exploit it. And not just Canadians, but the Canadian company. And that includes going after a publisher too. I mean, but needless to say, you don't need to have, like, if you're doing like a zombie apocalypse game, it doesn't have to be set in Montreal, for example. Like you can do it in Genericville, wherever. So
yeah, and maybe the only thing I'll add to that though is that I think that's true. It doesn't necessarily benefit the game. I think that if you are using Canadian locations or Canadian themes and voices, you're trying to reflect a Canadian experience. I mean, talking about that meaningfully in your application is useful. We ask our juries to consider when they're looking at their creative scoring, like if their consideration can be given to projects that give voice that give opportunities to different voices that represent a Canadian experience, but it's not going to prioritize or
yeah, like
over others that are based elsewhere. This is an as I said earlier, this is an international audience space for IDM. So we want to make
exactly.
sure
And
we're competitive.
if you want to be competitive and sell it all over the world, if it was really only relevant to Canadians, it's not going to sell that well. But yeah, what Janine said though. Janine, maybe you want to take this next question about sustainability.
Yeah. So thanks. That's a great question. So one of the things that's been added this year for all of our selective programs, and that affects the IDM space more than some of the linear, where there's a lot more broadcaster driven sort of automatic program funding. We are evaluating points for both community engagement plans and sustainability plans. And as Shelley mentioned, there's templates that talk about, what should be included on those. So the question here is that committing to carbon offsets for some bigger emission sources, yes, that could that be part of the sustainability plan? I think what we're trying to do here is really build a carrot and an opportunity for individuals to think more critically about their climate action commitments and how we can advocate for that in the digital media space. I think this conversation has been happening a bit longer, and it's a little bit more obvious in the linear side with the volume of physical production that occurs and the greening that you can take on when you're shooting content. So that looks a little bit different for IDM. So yes, these are automatic points. If you provide a plan that has, a couple concrete items that you intend to do, you are going to receive those points. We want to hear from you how you want to address climate action and sustainability efforts. So absolutely, carbon offsets, if that's, if you want to talk about more of what that looks like at a studio level, and it's harder to break that down project by project right now in this space, let's talk about that. And I think that's a great opportunity.
Great. I'll take this next one from Joe about, so if you have a studio that's already been in operation, but you've been working in like service contracts in the gaming industry for many years with your current team and employees, but now you're making a pivot to doing your own IP, is that looked at? Yes, it is. So we look at the whole company history, their experience in the past. Have they shipped any titles before? Have they worked, if they worked on service contracts and those titles have done well for the company that actually own them, that gets looked at, and your whole team experience is also looked at, and how you work together as a team. So yes, we look at everything about the company and the team. If I've already started writing code to explore the feasibility of a mechanics in a game, but haven't yet nailed it down for the full conceptualization, would that make me ineligible? I don't think so. I think you should try to apply if you think that you're at that stage. There's a lot of people that are noodling around with various ideas, but they need a little extra help in order to get themselves to the point where they feel they're ready for prototyping. So if you think you're still not ready for prototyping and you need to do some pre-prototyping work to get there, then yeah, come in for conceptualization. The worst thing that can happen is we call you and say you're too far along. Sorry, but we'll make that evaluation when you either ask for a pre-app and or the application comes in. Oh, the next comment is from Paisley.
So yes, that looks like there's maybe one more question after you, Paisley, which I can address.
I think Janine, I think you should do this one.
So Paisley, do you want me to wait on that question or answer, or we'll take Mark's as the last question? Okay, perfect. So yes, so Mark is asking, again, great question. We've sort of have 3 statements that we ask you to address in sort of what I would phrase as sort of cultural and social responsibility spaces. So the narrative positioning statement, that is, yes, that asks the question, how are you and your team most well positioned to create this content? That is a subjective content-based answer that's part of the team score. The sustainability and community engagement plans are automatic. You're committing to actionable measures in community engagement and sustainability. So you are saying, I'm going to provide this plan with these steps, and then, oh, it's doing that thing, the thumbs up. I'm always trying to get that to work, and it doesn't. It's like it's very inconsistent. But so yes, so that you're committing to certain steps, and then you're going to report to them on how or whether you were able to achieve those steps at the final report stage. So it's more objective and automatic. So yes, it's if they're included, and we include examples of what community engagement steps or sustainability steps could look like for both linear and IDM content. So again, the community engagement one especially, looks very different in an IDM space, especially for projects that are not narrative based and or based on stories or content coming from diverse communities. So that can include engagement with your audiences in the marketing phase. That's maybe the thing to emphasize there. So if you're looking at accessibility measures and you're pushing past some of the standards or guidelines that we have in the IDM sector for accessibility, and that's a great thing to talk about in a community engagement plan. Or if you're talking about reaching different communities or audiences that maybe normally wouldn't have access to this type of content or normally haven't been marketed to for the type of content that you're making, that's a great thing to incorporate into your community engagement plan.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention one last thing. So I think it implies that these forms are optional, but I would not opt out.
So they are,
something.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
They are optional. They're not required, but if you don't fill them out, you don't get the points. And as we've stated, every point counts, especially in the IDM selective programs. It looks a little bit different for some of the linear programs, but here if you can address that, it's a great way to get those points on your score.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So many questions. It's exciting to see a topic with so much interest. We'll move over to Jen so she can share some of her personal experience, and hopefully there's time for another round of questions at the end.
All right. I'll share my screen here. Then, okay. Oh, can everyone see my my PowerPoint? Awesome. All right. So I will, yeah, I'll get cracking here. My name is Jen LaFace. I'm the creative director and producer at Only by Midnight, and I'm going to talk about our team's experience with CMF applications, or how I learned to stop worrying and create a competitive CMF application. So just to give you an overview of Only by Midnight, we're based in Edmonton, Alberta. We incorporated in 2019. We're a remote team of about 8+ people, so we've got a combination of employees and contractors. We released our first game, Curve Space, a twin stick shmup shooter, so on a interesting topography. That was in 2021, so it was on PC, Steam, and console, including Nintendo Switch. And then we've had 5 successful CMF applications, and I just wanted to say we're extremely grateful to CMF. And for all their support. And yeah. So some of the stuff I'm going to cover is what Janine and Shelley has mentioned before, but I think it's just good to emphasize that, and that's stuff that we've come across. But before we start an application, we kind of think, what is our goal when applying to CMF? And that goes into what Janine and Shelley covered really well, which is like understanding what CMF is, like the different programs, the different guidelines, what's required, are you eligible? And then you look at the clarity of understanding what your project is and what you're communicating. And taking those two together, what we found is, how does your project fit with CMF's programs? So if you're kind of in the beginning stage, you have the inkling of an idea, conceptualization might be a good program to apply for. But if, like, let's say you have that paper prototype, you've got kind of ideas for that primary game loop. Applying for prototyping, or let's say if you want to take you've got like a minimum viable product or a vertical slice, applying for production may be the way to go, but you just have to understand, like, how does your project fit? And I totally agree. Review the submission guidelines and documents. Every time they come out, I read through them again. I always glean like a new insight. Yeah, and just to go over just our process in general, Only by Midnight, I discussed this, understanding the requirements. That's always important. And then there's a lot of discussions and planning. So even before there's pen to paper, fingers to keyboard, I meet with myself, and it's usually Amber, our interactive director and designer, Andrew, who's our technical director, and other people on our team. And we kind of discuss what the project is and how it relates to CMF. And we also look at, who's kind of responsible for what. Amber does much of our writing. I'll do some writing and look at budget and other documentation. And then we kind of decide if we want to do some support materials as well. And internally, we do that first draft of our materials, and we'll do a first review and go back and forth. Andrew will lend his technical expertise. And yeah, and then we do work with other organizations like Shred Capital, who have reviewers and to do an external review, which we find really helpful too, because we gain insights outside of ourselves. We've also done reviews with peers, and that's been quite helpful. And then before we submit, we've got everything together in the package. I put together a confirmed checklist. This is really important because you don't want to miss anything, or maybe you have other things that you want to add, like a letter of recommendation to show that, this is support that you can complete the project. So maybe if you've worked with another organization, and then we submit. So I do agree with Kitty here that, what do you wish you knew before applying? it's been a few years just kind of thinking back, but these are kind of points that came up through our experience. And one of them is just, that understanding which program best matches your current stage of development, just having that kind of deeper understanding. And I know Shelley and Janine talked about, does this fit into commercial or does this fit into innovation and experimentation? And each of those programs have their similarities, but there's also differences too. And they talked about putting them on screen and trying to match which one would fit best with you. So we've usually on our side have done innovation and experimentation because we're always trying to do something different with our games. Consider your process for applying. So think about like how long it will take for you to put the application together, to review drafts, to put together a budget. And if you've never done it before, give yourself more time and then add more time because it will take you longer than you think. One thing that we did, but I kind of wish that we did more of, is just support from the community. So attending events like this, talking to more people in the community. We did reach out and talk, but I think going out for coffee or having a discussion to get those insights, I think doing more of that is important. And also just understanding how the application is reviewed, to have that deeper understanding. Because in some cases, it will just be the CMF analyst, which I think is for prototyping conceptualization, but do correct me if I'm wrong. And then there's the production, which is the analyst and the jury. And not everyone looks at every document and there's overlap. So having that understanding of who reviews what, And then, because I want more wishes, just understand how all the documents relate. So in our case, we had written in our marketing document for one of our submissions that we were going to put, that we had a marketing partner, which was great. But we had lost points because we didn't mention that marketing partner in our team document because they are part of our team. And you have to understand that it's just not like one document they're going to read. It's the whole holistic, the cross-referencing of this application package. They all relate to each other. And it's important to keep that in mind. And we found that we've been able to make more solid applications and also consistency too. So if you say someone's going to be in this key role, but then change it on the budget, that's not good. And then, like they mentioned ahead of time, familiarize yourself with the upload process. So get orientated to dialogue. That's important. You don't want to be surprised. You don't want to be submitting 2 hours before the deadline. That's going to be a rough time. But there's documentation. There's also on the portal for each application, there are some fields to fill out as well. And you want to make sure you're on top of that and knowing that, maybe you need some text there. And this was an interesting one. And it was mentioned before about, the insurance requirements, but consider in your application, what happens if you do get CMF? If you do get CMF, there is like a expense review. So that's a final cost report. In some cases, I think for production, it's a capital A audit. You want to make sure that you've actually looked at that and understand what that requirement is, and that maybe you do have like a service provider, or someone, or you have an idea of the market cost. This is really important. And also, you are technically running a business. So there's the development side of making the game, but you want to consider do you have a bookkeeper, or who's organizing the expenses? You want to make sure that you can show that you're aware of that when you're applying, that this is going to go more smoothly than not. And then I won't spoil this one here. We'll go to the next slide. What was the biggest obstacle? Time. Time is the biggest obstacle. What was mentioned before, so understanding what CMF is looking for, the templates, so there's budget templates, there's filling out forms, make sure you're orientated to it, not leaving it to the last minute. The writing of the documents, the budgeting. For the making of the videos, from our experience, we had a lot more success with making a video that showcased our team. So more on what was mentioned before, the pitch side. But that was a lot of work. That was having a script, knowing what we're going to talk about, setting up my basement. That was really interesting. Our 9-year-old was excited by that. Filming, and then also you have to edit it, and if you want to add sound and music, and that takes a lot of effort. But the one thing about the video is that it also complements your whole package that you're in your application. It's another way to say and to tell your story of your project to CMF. And we found it that we would probably do that again. Support documents. So if you're going to do like an art book, so who's wrangling that? Who's doing the art? Who's doing the layout? Organizing other documents and resources. This is very important. Kind of keep everything in one place on a digital file, because it'll make it easier when you submit. It's not all over the place. But in our case, we'll apply for like prototyping, and then we'll look back to what we previously did too. So having that at arm's fingers reach has been really effective for us. So I do have a second biggest obstacle, which is clarity, or I agree with Yoda, communication. If you're uncertain what you're communicating, other people will be uncertain. So you have to understand what CMF is looking for. So we'll read over the requirements. Those headings that were mentioned that Shelley was talking about, we'll use those as our guiding star as we're writing our application, because we make it easy to find and to answer. And another thing is the just understanding the expectations for each program as well, like what they require. There's similarities, but also differences or page lengths. And just to reiterate, recognize you are telling a story about your project. You want to make that clear and understandable. Time spent on the application. It really depends. So this includes, you know, not just the writing of it, but the organizing, the wrangling, the reviews, the back and forth, the feedback. It takes a lot of time. And if you're doing like a video, you want to give yourself enough time. And it's not just one person doing it. There's myself, Amber, if we're asking another team member, Andrew, if we have a reviewer, if we're working with our art director for the art book. It takes a lot of time. So just some other important pieces needed before applying. So there's mention of the financials, records, if you have those on file. So incorporation. So you want to let CMF know like how many, like ownership of the company, how many shares, what type of shares. And you want to have that information readily available. So in our case, we've gone through like an accountant and have that information. And we found that's been keeping it one central place to refer to has been really great. Dialogue sign up, do that ahead of time. You don't want to wait. And it was mentioned before with the persona ideas, you do want to get ahead of that. You do want to make sure that your team, especially the key roles, have signed up for it. Yeah, just some other insights and tips. So we learn from every application and feedback. We take every opportunity to talk to the CMF analyst after a decision has been made. And I learn something new every time, and we're grateful that CMF will answer our questions. We look at requirements from previous application deadlines. So we like to get like a head start. Sometimes there'll be differences, but CMF has been really good at communicating, you know, what those differences are between intake deadlines. And we found that instead of waiting, we get that head start. Something that I just practice generally in my life is asking, what does that mean? If you're not sure, ask or don't assume, because you might have like a question, like how all the documents are related, or the application package, or what's on marketing has to be on team, for example. And this relates to community. Reach out to the community, attend events like this at Digital Alberta. And yeah, reach out to other indie studios. Most people are approachable and excellent to talk to. And yeah, and also ask CMF. All right. Well, thank you for listening. You can reach me at this email or reach our team. Our current game is that we have funding for was previously Negotiate, but it's Control-Alt-Deal. You are a strategy game in a set in a simulation as an AI trying to escape your dystopian corporation through negotiating and wheeling and dealing. We're on Steam, and yeah, we have Discord as well. Yeah, I'm happy to jump into any questions or.
Thanks, Jen. I think there's one question. It says, does the art Bible have to be your art? Can it be AI art? Is it a concept art book?
Oh, here, I will stop sharing. There we go. Okay. does the art Bible have to be your art? Can it be AR? Oh, so we don't do we don't use artificial intelligence for our art or anything. We do on our end, we have we have artists produce stuff for us, and we'll put it together, and we kind of have like a plan to showcase an idea of like what the feel of the game is, what art may show up in the game. So just to give them that idea, but we don't use AI art ourselves.
I can answer that though for CMF is that
Okay.
generally, like when you're getting to later stages, you should have your own artists probably, but when you're early on and you just want to create a mood board, we don't mind if you use AI. So.
And I would just to add on to that, I would say, but we've launched a principles of artificial intelligence, use of artificial intelligence as part of our changes to our guidelines this year. One of those is transparency. So if you are using AI art in your application packages, I would suggest that you mark it as such so it's clear, especially as Shelley says, as you get into those later stages, you're going to be evaluated on whether or not you can deliver on that art look, on that look and feel. So our juries want to know, and we want to know, is this art that's AI generated, or is this art that's coming from the key personnel in your team? So just, marking as such, if it's concept art and it's not, that's a great thing to kind of denote.
Well, there's another question. Are mood boards with references okay? I think I'll Janine, Shelley.
I would say yes. Most people that submit mood boards or like early stage art that are generated by AI will usually say so on the document. And so, yeah, I think the answer to that would be yes. But again, when you get to later stages, we get, you may do better if you have an actual art director or artists working on it. But in conceptualization and prototyping, it's fine to use AI, but you probably should disclose that. Janine, anything to add to that?
No, I think that's exactly it. I think, yeah, they can be, but I think again, as those later stages, it's about, whether or not you're going to be judged on how you can deliver on the look you're putting in your application. So keep that in mind when is the right time to be using concept or AI generated mood boards versus work that's coming from your visual team and design team.
Anyone have any other questions?
We have about 10 more minutes, so anyone with questions, feel free to raise your hand. Mike?
Yeah, if it's okay, I'll jump on video. But thank you, Jen, for sharing that, and Janine and Shelley. It's been a delightful and learning experience for me. This is a new area that I'm learning about. Several times, all of you cautioned to not leave things to the last minute. Is there a typical season where applications open up or intakes begin, and in sort of the calendar year that we should be aware of?
Janine, do you want me to get that one? Okay, so our fiscal year at CMF runs from April 1st to March 31st every year. So we launch the new website with all the new guidelines and deadlines as of generally April 1st or around that. And then over the weeks, they post all the documents like the budget templates and checklists and whatnot in accordance to the deadlines that are coming up. So obviously they prioritize the programs happening earlier than others. And that's usually completed within the next 2 to 3 weeks of April. Now for IDM funding, I call it experimental for the next 2 years probably, but for IDM funding, there's always a spring round and a fall round. And this is for the selective funds. So prototyping is generally a date in May, usually late May, and then a date in October. And then production innovation and production commercial are usually in late April to early May and September. Then we have the first come first serve fund conceptualization that I believe opens in June. Yeah, I always confuse whether it's June or July, but June. And so that'll open on a date in June, and then it will be open until either we don't spend the money and it closes at the end of November, or we spend all the money before the end of November deadline. And once the money runs out, we'll put a note on the website saying money's gone, come back next year. But there are some funds, if you've ever worked on the linear side and you've put in applications, there are some funds that are first come, first serve, where it's like opening date, closing date, boom, same day. It's not the same because it's just they're really, really competitive. But the conceptualization fund, I wouldn't say that it's not competitive, but I will just say that it doesn't open and close on the same day. It took me 3 months to spend the money last year. So and other years, you know, like the very first year of it, it was boom, open and close same day. But as the years go by, because there's various rules to entry. So for example, any producer who's received more than $1 million in production ever in the history of the IDM fund are not eligible to apply to this fund because they're considered experienced enough that they don't need conceptualization funding. There is an exception on that for diverse companies and women-led companies, but there's also one project per year is allowed in conceptualization, so you can only apply with one. So that's why it doesn't open and close on the same day really fast. It usually takes a few months for the money to go. So when it opens, don't feel like I have to get my application in today. Like you don't. You'll probably be fine, you know, taking your time, but I wouldn't take your time past September or October though. So
Thank you very
Shelley,
much.
like you should be looking at around like the April 1st to see the new program
yeah, so
timelines
it's
on
already up there for this year. So the one disadvantage for the people who want to apply in innovation and commercial in the spring round is what I told them as they called over the last few months, and what our coordination team was telling them is use last year's documents to prepare your applications because you don't want to wait to start in April, but check them against the new ones because there could be new requirements, which there are. So if you have last year's checklist that you were using for this spring round, swap it out now for the new checklist because there's new things like the sustainability, the community engagement, and various other little tweaks to it. So you know, you can use last year's to prepare for the spring round, but always make sure to compare them to the new year to make sure there's not other stuff that you need to prepare. Because like as Jen said, you need a few months to prepare an application. So the spring round can be really fast. But it's not really if you started preparing well before that. You just want to make sure you have every application that application document that you need that's on the 2024-25 fiscal year checklist, which may not be on the old one. Sorry, did I answer your question?
Shelley, that was a wonderfully detailed answer to my question. Thank you so much. I learned a lot, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh, the other thing I should mention too is on the website under the selective programs, it does say opening date, closing date. Interpret that as, because some people now that they've published the opening date think it's a first come first serve fund when it is not. The opening date for selectives means when it will show up on the drop down list in dialogue. That's all it is. So there's no advantage to applying on that day because I think we didn't used to do that. We just published the deadline, but last year we started doing that and people started scrambling to put their application in on the opening date when they didn't need to. They could have waited till midnight on the closing date, and that's midnight Eastern time. And you know, a lot of people called us to say, is it first come first serve now? Why is there only 2 weeks for that? And so the opening date is when it shows up on the drop down on dialogue. The closing date is the real deadline.
And you know, to Jen's point, you know, communication is key, and we've got some challenges, I think, with the template we're using for our website, where we can't differentiate some monikers between our first come first serve and our selected programs. So it's a really good point to remember.
I do a lot of grant writing, and you know, I'm not versed on the CMF, but a tip that I always give to anyone is to have some sort of a business plan always ready for your company. Something that has your whole team and your bios together, like an overview of your projects you're working on. You'll never regret spending a couple days putting all of that together, and you can always reuse it, not just for the CMF, but any other little grants that come up. You know, Alberta Export Expansion Program just opened up as well. Some people might be looking at that, or other different types of funds. And so having some sort of business plan just helps you be a lot more agile when these opportunities come up. Awesome. We have time for one last question. No takers. Awesome. Well, thank you so much to Janine, Shelley, and Jen. The insight was absolutely amazing. This is a super requested topic, so we're really happy that we were able to bring some experts like yourselves in. I'll do a couple plugs for Digital Alberta. We have some exciting programming coming up in the next couple months. We will have an awesome accessibility workshop in June, which will cover creating software with an accessibility lens for people with vision differences, hardware for limb differences in gaming, and neurodivergence, which is going to be really cool. And we are just in the early stages of planning Alberta Game Series for the fall, so that will be coming back in hopefully early October. We will have the dates published, hopefully by the end of the month. So thank you so much. Be sure to join our newsletter and follow us on LinkedIn so you can find all the upcoming programming as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us. It's been a treat. Take
Thanks
care,
very
guys.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks, team. Thanks, community. Good to see you all.